today we are really excited because we have Kris with us, who's going to present a magnificent, very interesting, insightful project on talk, right? So I'm just going to leave the Kris presentations to Alyssa, and that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So before I introduce Kris, I will just go ahead and say thanks everybody so much for joining as well. I also wanted to talk about the code of conduct real quick, just to remind everybody. So PyData Madison is a part of PyData, and PyData is a part of NumFocus, which is a nonprofit organization that's committed to educating and teaching people and building a positive community for people who want to learn how to code. So, of course, the short version of their code of conduct is to be kind to everybody, of course. A bunch of obvious stuff like don't insult people, don't put everybody else down, behave professionally, remember that harassment and sexist, racist, or exclusionary jokes are obviously not appropriate for our events. All communication should be appropriate for a professional audience, including people of many different backgrounds. And NumFocus and PyData Madison is dedicated to providing a harassment-free community for everybody, regardless of their gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, religion, or socioeconomic status. We do not tolerate harassment of community members in any form. This is a place for us to all learn and get together and have a great, friendly data science and Python time. So, great. And we're using this software called Blackboard Collaborate. It's got one feature that I wanted to point out to everybody. So I asked Kris, and he said to please go ahead and ask questions during the talk. And Blackboard Collaborate makes this really easy because there is a little button right here that you can raise your hand or then also lower your hand. You can see it next to your microphone and camera button. It's very nice and handy and easy to use. And there's also the chat on the side of the panel. It's under a purple tab if you don't have it pulled up. And you can post questions there as well. So without further ado, I will now introduce Kris. He is a third-year PhD student in the Bacteriology Department at UW-Madison. He is in his third year of knowing what Python is. He graduated from Central Michigan University, where he worked in the research lab of Dr. Michael Conway, studying the transmission of the dengue virus.
Yeah.
I hope I got that right. Okay, cool. Through its mosquito vector and the role of innate immune system in viral pathogenicity. For his current thesis project, Kris is studying how viruses that can infect bacteria can drive processes in the world around us, such as how the oceans cycle nutrients or how gut microbiome may cause diseases. And in order to do this, Kris leverages DNA sequencing data and bioinformatics tools to find out what may be hidden in the microscopic world. With that, I will now hand it over to you, Kris.
All right, thanks, Alyssa, for the intro. Can you hear me good enough still?
Yep.
All right, cool. So as Alyssa said, I study viruses, and Python is not my main focus. So bear with me if you're way ahead of me, but hopefully I can at least provide some useful information. So again, definitely ask questions along the way. That's basically why I'm here and why I'm doing this, is to be a better resource and just Googling things. So raise your hand, ask questions. If you don't want to talk or you can't, then you can put it in the chat as well. And also, if I can't answer anything, then somebody else can chime in. That's totally fine. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. Maybe. Okay. There we go. All right. So, Alyssa, can you see my?
Yep.
Cool. Just want to make sure. So I have a presentation a PowerPoint, but this is not the majority of my talk, so don't feel like it's going to be a lecture. But I'm going to be telling you about creating a software or some type of distributable form of scripts that you have written or you might write in the future, and how you can do this without being a Python programmer, or what you can do with essential Python skills. So I'm not going to jump into things that you need in a few years' time when you're really into Python, but what can you do right now, and how can you accomplish that? And also to bring the scary factor out of creating a distributable software, because at least for me, before I did this, it sounded way out of my comfort zone, but it's definitely achievable. So this is me. I just have a quick intro slide, since I've actually never met any of you in person except for Alyssa. So I'm a third-year grad student, and I study how viruses infect bacteria. And don't be worried about that. I'm assuming that most of you aren't biologists, and viruses will be a component of my talk, but definitely not a prerequisite of following anything I say. And then I have a background in nothing to do with computers, and I don't have any formal training in Python. So everything I'll tell you about is what I've figured out on my own, and why it goes back to being basic Python skills. Oh yeah, and this is around the outside is things I like to do, and my beautiful dog that I have pictures at the end about, because somebody said that we need to post pictures of our animals, which you will see that later. I feel like I heard something. I can't tell if people raise their hand anymore. Oh, a heart. Okay, sorry. This might be kind of weird switching back and forth. So basically, quick outline of what I'll talk about. So a quick overview of what a Python package actually is. So maybe everybody already has an idea of this, but at least for me, a year or two ago, I had no idea really what Python package meant. So I'll go over what that actually is. I'm sure some of you are in the same boat that I was. And then importantly, what I want to bring across is, what do you need to consider when you distribute a software package, and how do you go about actually making it distributable rather than just writing a script for yourself? And then in order to actually do that, I need to introduce the package that, or the software that I'll be talking about, which is Vibrant, that I wrote, and then a little bit about viruses, because they are awesome. And then after that, I'll go back to package. So again, what I expect to provide to you is my experiences with this, and not necessarily my expertise, because everything, or a lot of what I know, is what you can Google. So if you have questions, I can definitely try to answer them and point you in the right direction, but I'm not really trying to teach you something specific. And then again, a reminder that I've said a lot: ask questions. And then somebody stop me if I don't see any questions. So what is a package? So there's words that I use interchangeably, which is modules and packages, which to me, in my head, I just think of as a group of scripts, basically. But it's more of that a package is a collection of modules that perform a function for you, that are just a higher level of single scripts. So maybe all of us, probably not all of us, but maybe we've all written our own script. It's totally fine if you haven't, if you're very much a beginner. But beyond writing a script is putting scripts together. And scripts that go together, various different Python functions that perform a larger task, that you can do this or do that and put things together. That's what I would call a package. And there's different ways to package things. The fourth bullet point here, the init file, meta, and setup. These are standard ways to create packages. They're typical things that Python understands, like the init file. But the way that you package something doesn't need to follow any specific rules in terms of what you need to do, which I'll get into. I put a YouTube video here. This is just like, I don't know how long it is, like a 3-minute video or something, but it's just something that I thought was a random YouTube video that explained things concisely. So if you're a beginner and you don't understand any of this, nothing I've said so far, you can go check out that video as just a quick overview. So here's just a broader example of what I'm talking about with these files that are used for packaging. And again, I feel like I heard something, but I can't tell. Oh, okay, so it doesn't seem to be a video. That's fine, sorry. I can try to find a different video if that doesn't work. But like I said, it's just a random introduction video, so it's not necessary. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So this is actually wrong. There we go. So just some random interpretations and examples of what these files are. And again, this isn't super important for what's necessary to know for packaging. So one example of an init file, I guess a better way to describe this is an init file can bring together your different scripts and put them together into a package. And this can be in the form of importing things or actually telling Python what is part of the package. So I'll get to examples of that later, but if you've ever seen an init file come with a collection of scripts, that file is more or less, in a lot of circumstances, just linking things together. So you might have all heard of a description of a computer as not really being able to think on its own. You have to tell it exactly what you want, and that's what an init file is. Python and your computer don't know that what you have is a package. You have to tell it that it's a package, and one way to do that is to have an init file. Another file is this meta.yaml file, and I have an example of that I can show. But this is, again, the last bullet point. It's just whatever you want to do, whatever you want to use as something that can put your scripts together, you can do it. So let me pull up some examples. So this meta file that I have here, this is for a bioconda recipe for the program that I'll be talking about. And this is just an example of how conda specifically can make an environment and package your scripts together. So you have your package name, you have where you get it from, you have the different dependencies and versions and whatnot, commands that you'll be running, and just other information. So what some of these files are just info to tell your computer what's going on and what you need. So are there downsides to packaging before I get into it? Why do you need to package, and why wouldn't you? For me, when I first wrote Vibrant, I didn't really create a package, and that's because of the learning curve. So I knew enough to code in Python, but I didn't feel comfortable with what I thought was all these fancy, what is an init file and what's this environments and stuff. So to me, there was a learning curve to it at first. So I actually didn't start packaging my software at first. And the other downside is that builds can fail. So you have to build a package and you have to put things together, and sometimes those linkages fail. So here's an example of this image I ran across issues with Bioconda, telling me that there's all these problems and things failed, and my Bioconda package wouldn't work, but if you were to just download the scripts, it'd work fine. So packaging is just like anything fancy, it can have more issues than the manual version. And then what I hope to show you when I get to the examples is that there's not any necessary requirements for packaging. So if you were to ask me, what do I need to know? What's the requirement to know before I create a package for my software? And there's not really anything specific. If you choose a certain way, like if you want to package your scripts through pip or through Conda or through Docker, each of those will have their own specific requirements to comply with what they need to do. But in the general concept of packaging, there's no set rule of what you need to do. The bottom line is that if you can put it together and it works and there's no issues, then really there's nothing wrong with what you've done. So is there any questions so far? I mostly rambled about stuff before I get to anything.
Yeah, I had a question. What is this YAML file, and what does YAML stand for?
I have no idea what YAML stands for, and I've never made one of those files before. Do you know what the answer is?
No, I have no idea.
So
I think it's yet another markup language.
Okay. So I don't know who said that, but thank you. So it's a markup language. So again, this is, oh, I'm not showing my screen. Sorry. Let me go back to showing my screen. Okay. So this is, again, if you look at the very top, an example of the YAML file. And I guess this is a markup language. So I guess YAML is reading these package, source, build, requirement sections, and setting up the environment necessary for constructing this package, is my interpretation. So for example, my Vibrant version 1.2.1 requires Python at least version 3.5. It requires scikit-learn version at least 0.21.3, things like that. And this is where that environment is being set up. And then these commands are being tested, I guess, to see if everything was downloaded correctly. And as all good documentation sources are, they have about things like where can you go to find the information, the licenses, this is published, all that stuff. But this is just, for example, Bioconda's version of packaging. So I guess this is a fine segue to go to here. We have this YAML file, again, same thing that I showed online, get your package and your source build for Bioconda. And then I also have a Docker file, again, which I did not create, somebody else made it for me. There's a Docker file with different type of syntax that's used to Dockerize Vibrant. So in this case, this Docker source is using Ubuntu. You install Bagel and Hammer, which are a couple dependency programs. You have your Python dependencies like Seaborn and NumPy, scikit-learn, which I mentioned, etc. And then here's where they're saying where to enter in. So vibrant_run.py. Same thing as this meta YAML file. You have vibrant_run.py. So the way that files are set up to package can look very, very different. Like this Docker file looks nothing like this YAML file, but they're both doing more or less the same thing. Is that the long answer to the short question of what is a meta YAML file?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks.
So again, just to quickly recap everything, this file and this file are two different ways of doing the same thing. This one is for Docker, setting up the Docker image and the environment for running Vibrant through Docker. And this is the environment file for Biocon to install. So it's just two different versions, same thing, different programs. All right. So whether you can actually get your package or get your software packaged, there's still a lot to consider beyond just putting it together. Random example off the top of my head, because I'm looking out the window, you can build a car, but if there's nobody that knows how to do it and nobody can drive it and understand it, then it's not useful. So that brings me to the question of what makes a software easy to distribute. And usually the answer is package it. So everybody loves to do pip install whatever, or conda install whatever, instead of doing git clone, and you got to do a make file, and you got to move around, you got to do things, and everybody's lazy. So obviously packaging something into a single command that puts it right into the path of your computer is easy. But the next biggest thing, in my opinion, is your documentation. So this is, again, moving from making a script on your own to, or making a script on your own to run it yourself, to having other people use your scripts, whether it's packaged or not. So if the other people can't find your documentation, if it's not clear, if your README isn't useful, and if it doesn't include everything, then even if your software was easy to download, maybe nobody will use it because they can't figure out how. So again, having clear documentation and information about how to run your software is almost as important as actually getting it to install on your computer. And then, like I said, everybody's lazy. Nobody can really deny it. If your software is difficult to install and there's a lot of steps and figuring out how to do things takes hours, then people might not use it. You'll have a base of people that are comfortable with Python or whatever programming language you want to use. But if you'd like a lot of people to use your software and you want this to be useful, then having as few manual steps as possible is nice. And again, that's where packaging comes in handy. Random note, not really that important, but if you have a unique name or some type of recognition for your software, you'll probably be in a better boat. So Vibrant isn't really that unique, but maybe it's a little bit easier to recognize versus a taxonomy tool that I use called GTDB-TK, which is just a mouthful and annoying. So not saying that GTDB-TK is bad, it's just something to consider. It's kind of your own personal preference. If you want something that stands out and people will remember what your software is. And then the next thing that I don't think is always an issue, but is one of the most asked questions to me about Vibrant is, how do I deal with this dependency issue or this version control issue? Maybe I'll pull up my Vibrant GitHub issues page, but half of them are about dependencies and versions. So if your software requires lots of installations, if updates are required, if specific versions are required, then it's really important to either put in a bash script or in a Python script automated installation for the user, or some mechanism of making it very, very clear how to get those programs installed, how to update them, and what to do with dependencies and version controls. Because again, just like not clear information, if somebody has great documentation of your script or package, if they can install it easily, but one dependency isn't working, and you don't have clear information on just how to deal with that dependency, they might not use your package, even if it's perfect. So again, full circle back to people are lazy. And then this isn't always possible for certain things. If it's just a collection of Python scripts, then it probably is, but making your package universal so that it works on lots of different platforms like Linux and Mac and Windows. So that is my list of things. Again, is there any questions at this point? I can check back in here. Okay, cool. Looks like we're good. Get back to sharing my screen. So I just have a super quick intro to viruses and phages, because I'll pull up my script and talk about what I'm doing and how I set it up. So I'll be going, like I said, intro, how Vibrant works, and then how Vibrant runs. I'm not going to read this whole slide, I promise you, but I think phages are cool. They do a lot for us. If you've heard of phage therapy or CRISPR, or I guess I don't know what else I can do here. Food contamination. A lot of these different things are centered around bacteriophages or phages or viruses that infect bacteria, and pretty much nobody talks about them, but they're really important for human health, for global health, and biotechnology. So just blurb about phages. So just because I think phages are cool again, they're these little tiny things that float around the environment, and they attach to bacteria. They hijack the bacteria and make the bacteria do what they want, make new little particles, and then burn the bacteria. So this is happening every single day, all the time. These little viruses are killing all the bacteria that are everywhere. And there's tons and tons and tons of these viruses in the environment. So what Vibrant does is tries to find them. My computer is freaking out and very hot. Can you hear the fan on my computer?
Just like a tiny bit, but it's not, it's like, I wouldn't have noticed it unless you pointed it out.
Okay, cool, because it is deafening. Okay, sorry about that. So I'm going to skip this slide because it's not important. So if I lose you here, that's fine, really, but I just want to explain what type of information that Vibrant's taking in. so that if it gets to that, then it's not super confusing. But like I said, Vibrant, my software, identifies viruses, and it does it using sequencing data. So again, I'm sure most of you, or if not any of you, are not biologists. But genomes, like virus genomes, are made up of proteins and different genes. And these genes, we can annotate what they do. So we can use databases, and we can identify what the function of a gene is in some cases. And we can use different databases to identify if the gene looks like it belongs to a bacteria, or if the gene looks like it belongs to a virus. So I have color-coordinated different databases. Red is virus, blue and yellow is bacteria. So if you annotate genes and they get annotated by this red database, it's viral. Gets annotated by this blue database, it's bacteria. Pretty straightforward. That's what a lot of bioinformatics is at the very base of it. So what Vibrant does is it takes an unknown sequence, annotates it, looks at those annotations, decides if it's a virus or bacteria. And the reason it is a software and it's not just some little script is because just saying blue or red in the case of these databases is not enough to differentiate a virus and a bacteria. So if we look at the actual annotations of these genes, the genes within the bacteria database can belong to a virus. So I have a lot of different viral annotations on this unknown sequence. So what Vibrant does is looks at both the number of annotations for different databases as well as the virus-like nature of different annotations, and it assigns scores to each annotation information. So Vibrant is working with basically abundance data and qualitative data that was put into quantities. I'm going to skip this too because it's not that important. So again, the way Vibrant work is not super important for explaining everything, but Vibrant uses gene annotation abundances and information, different metrics, and it uses neural network machine learning to look for patterns of the types of databases that genes are annotated from, the virus scores from those annotations, and some different metrics to differentiate viruses from bacteria. So it's basically just a big data table and a neural network classifier. So this is what some of the data looks like. So we have viruses in green, bacteria in blue, and other non-virus things in red. And Vibrant basically takes the green ones and says those are viruses, the red ones says not viruses, and then what the neural network is really for is piecing apart this stuff in yellow. Again, I had the idea to show this, but this is just saying that Vibrant is good and it works. But again, not super important for talking about how it's packaged and stuff like that. So I'll get into kind of under the hood of Vibrant. So what does Vibrant look like? What does the package look like? And how did I create this? About a year ago, almost a year ago, is when I started writing. How did I do this with minimal skills? So I really didn't have that good of a set of Python skills when I started. And then I can go into what I would have done differently, how to streamline it, and how building different modules and putting them into a package would have made it better, or better's not the right word, would have made it more streamlined, but really would not have changed the functionality of Vibrant at all. And then, like I said a bit ago, I'm going to get into some GitHub issues, or like issues that were put on GitHub about Vibrant. So just examples. So going over to here. So in this folder here, I have basically everything that is included with Vibrant. I'm sorry, I don't like that. Hopefully this is big enough for everybody. So as with most packages, sorry, let me get some water. As with most packages, what you have when you download them is a few different folders and several different scripts and a single executable file. So different packages might use several different scripts to actually function and to run, to do their different processes. And there's different files associated with it to give the software different data files to look through, such as the machine learning model if you have that. But at the base of it, there's one script that the user will run. And in Vibrant's case, this Vibrant run, it runs Vibrant. So it's pretty standard. You got your setup and your imports, which is kind of the base of things. I put adding my arguments at the beginning. But what I think is funny, now that I'm here, is that I actually have defined no functions in this script. I have no functions in here. In this other script, this is a large one that does the majority of Vibrant, of doing the different classifications. Again, there's actually no functions defined in here because when I started this, I didn't feel comfortable with defining functions. I didn't fully figure out how to piece them all together. So if you are well versed in Python, your jaw might be dropping right now that I don't have any functions or anything in here. And to those of you who are beginners, I hope this is an example that if you see a script that has all these functions and return values and you're confused, that's useful. That's very nice for clarity later on, but it's not necessary. You don't need anything, quote, fancy to package your script. So back to Python here, back to the package here. So I have a run script, which is what you'd actually type on the command line to run this, a collection of scripts that Vibrant run reads in then some files that are read in order to basically get the information that Vibrant needs. And then I mentioned those databases. Here's all the databases that it reads. So basically the base setup that you need for creating package is an executable and hierarchy of your different scripts that are required for your package. If you only have a single script, then creating a package isn't necessary because you don't need to put anything together. So the way I accomplished packaging, quote packaging, early on when I first created this was to use subprocess to go into this folder and run these scripts. So I'll get to why that's different than normal in a second. But here's an example of how I went about packaging together these different scripts at the beginning. So I have an execute statement here, and again, nobody can read other people's Python code, so I'll try to make this clear. So I have an execute function here, and what it does is it takes the path, which I defined earlier. It takes the path of the executable file, goes into the scripts folder, and then runs this extract nucleotide file. So what it's doing is it's saying, here is the path to this executable, go to a folder called scripts, and run a file called extract nucleotide. So this isn't technically an example of a package. This is just telling your computer to run a process using subprocess. So an alternative to doing it the way that I did it here is to make an actual package, which this is not a real implementation that Vibrant has, but I really need to put this in. But again, I'll show you how packaging versus not officially packaging really doesn't make a big difference. So the other way you can do it is I mentioned this init file here. And this init file, let me get rid of this. This init file is empty. There's nothing in here. It doesn't do anything on its own. But what it is just telling the computer and telling Python that you have a package. Now we're using a package. So if we look at how that works, this is the same Vibrant run as before, but now I'm going to do a different import of this extract nucleotide file. So instead of doing a subprocess run and actually executing the script through the terminal, basically, I can import that script as a module. So I can import it as just nuke is just an example of what I called it. So here's my bright blue terminal. Sorry, I did not set this up earlier. Okay. So if I were to run this Vibrant run, I have an exit statement here, so it's going to stop. If I run this Vibrant run, and I don't need to give it any data, it's just going to run it. It's going to take a second, and it's going to give me an error. And it's going to say that in this Vibrant extract nucleotide, there was an issue, you didn't give it any data. So this is the original extract nucleotide. Again, like I said, I have no definitions in here because I didn't know what I was doing. So what Python is doing when you create this package concept is it's loading in what you tell it to load. So it's going to say that, here's the init file actually. It's going to say that what you have here is a package. And from scripts, so it's going to know that scripts is part of this package here. From scripts, import this file, Vibrant extract nucleotide, because I told it to import Vibrant extract nucleotide. I just said nuke, which will come up later. And it gave me an error because what it's trying to do is load this in and it's trying to run it right away. Because this is an actual script. It's executable. It does something. So it's going to try to load this in and run it, and it's going to give error because there's no argument inputted. So what you need to do to create an actual package is set definitions. So I can define extract as a function. So now instead of, sorry, I keep going back and forth between windows. Now instead of importing a script, I'm importing a function. So now I'm importing this file here, which is defined as a function. So I can define nuke as a function, and I can run nuke, the extract nuke function in here, and I can give it some input. So I can do that right now. And again, I'll show you why you can get away with not doing this if you have very minimal Python skills. So Ecknuke takes in a couple different inputs. Basically, I have this name file here that I already created. So I have a name file, it just has a name of something in it. I have a sequences file that has the corresponding name and the DNA sequence of it. And what I want to do is take sequence from sequences, use this name, and put it into this new file. So now, since I defined a function in vibrant extract nucleotide, I'm importing it, and I'm calling it nuke. I can run nuke and run it as a standard module that you would with any other import like NumPy or sklearn or math or whatever. So I can run this, and it's going to run, finished. And now what I have is this new file that I just created, 652, and it extracted the sequence. So it basically just did its job. So let's look at what would happen if I didn't run this and instead use subprocess, and I just said from scripts extract nucleotide, run the same thing. So let me delete this thing, run it again, and what you get is the same result. So the point of what I want to show you is that you can import your modules into the package as imports, and then call those functions with your different variables. But it's the same thing as what I originally did with subprocess, which is just essentially using your terminal, your shell, to execute a script. So at the base of it, what packaging yours together does is make it so that you can run all of them together. But the way that you do that really doesn't matter. One of them is more clean than the other. You could argue that this just makes more sense to say calling the function. It might be slightly faster, lower, but in the grand scheme of things, how you accomplish it is not that important. I just have another example of how somebody else has accomplished it. Here's a different software. It's called Annotate. Again, same thing. You have a wrapper script that runs all these other different modules that are part of the package. You don't see an init file. They don't have one. But what this script does is, sorry, I didn't write this. Let me find it. It takes, it uses OS, operating system import, to add this to the path of your computer. So it adds this lib folder. And this lib folder right here contains all the scripts. So the way that I did this is I use subprocess. The way that most packages work is to use like an init file or something. And the way that Annotate did it was just to add this to the path and straight out call these scripts specifically. So everybody basically uses a different mechanism of packaging. Is there any questions about that? Tutorials on creating init files and how they work and all of that is pretty simple on YouTube if you have any issues with that. But does anybody have any specific questions? Oh, cool. So another thing I can talk about quickly is I lost my train of thought. Setup files. So I talked about dependencies and if you have to download anything, setup files and making setup automated for the user is very important. So Vibrant also comes with a setup file. There is such thing as setup.py just by itself, and it's just like an init file. It's a specific function, but this is just a setup file that I create on my own. And what this setup file does is automate all of the checks that you might run across with installing this software and setting it up and all of that. So this comes to how distributing the software is much different than writing one for yourself. So if you write a script for yourself or a package for yourself, know that you have everything installed correctly. You know you have the right dependencies. You know you have the right versions. You know you can install things. But what's difficult is making it so all of that can be automated, and you go through all the checks for other people to make sure that it all works. So, for example, Vibrant requires these databases. And to get these databases, you download them from the internet. And they have source websites. So here's a source website for one of the databases. I get it through wget. And typically, you can just go to that database and download it without a problem. But random, unforeseen things are always good to remember when you distribute a software. For example, I was going through my development of this, and randomly one day, one of these websites was down for maintenance, and I couldn't access it. So I realized that I needed to, in the setup script, create a check to make that the source websites are actually available. So before I even have the setup script download databases, I go to these links, see if there's actually an output if they load, and if not, then it gives an error. So setting up all these things to make sure that all of the imports work. If the imports don't work with like a try statement, then you can say there's an error, please install these dependencies. You can make sure that everything has the right version, like sklearn version, numpy version. I use grep to check some files and make sure that they download quickly. But basically doing everything possible to make sure that it's all correct before somebody else uses your software is essential for making sure that people will continue to use it. So unless you have questions, that's mostly all I have. It's been about an hour, so I can go on to GitHub issues. There's been a lot of them. But if you have any questions about what issues are married to us, I don't know, any advice for packaging and distributing a software, hopefully what I've shown you, my lack of expertise, is that you can put all of this together without super in-depth knowledge, and you can get something to work and get something that is useful for people and get it out there in a manageable way. That is what I have.
Awesome. Yeah, that was great. Do we have any questions? Oh, so cute. Awesome. Okay, well, if there's no questions, if you have a question later, please feel free to put it in the Slack channel or just any questions in general. And thank you so much, Kris, for your awesome presentation. It was really great, and I learned a lot of really interesting things. So it was really cool. And thanks everybody else for joining, and we really appreciate you being really patient with our rescheduling and moving everything to a online web conference format. So thank you, everybody.